Okay, Robert, welcome to the sofa.
Thank you. Thank you.
You just gave a fantastic talk, very much from Firefox perspective, talking about tools, but also probably the funniest talk I've seen ever, I think, so thank you. If you missed the talk, if you're listening to this on the live stream, or if you're watching it back later, people can come back and watch that, so we won't give too many secrets away. But if you, sitting here, look at kind of the career that you've had and the past and the decisions that you've made, or maybe steps that you took where you now in hindsight think that was an important point I made, what would those be if you're thinking about them?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me was back when I was 20 and I didn't know what to study or get loans for, etc.
Yeah.
So I just started working, and the mindset was kind of like, well, if I work really hard, I can do anything, which is, you know, half right, half naive to a certain extent. So I was working with all kinds of different things, from working for UPS, putting boxes onto the lorries that would drive them out to the airport and stuff like that, and then started working with customer service and working with accounting and anything I would get into. And then it just kept on going, and I had different jobs, and then you know, you're young, you're in the city world, so you resign and you travel around the world for a few months, and you come home and you need to get a new job, and so you sort of learn things as a human, but you're not necessarily making career progress.
Yeah.
So I think,
did it feel important at that time to make a career progress?
yeah, I think it's kind of the silly dream of that you want to make enough money to sort of be able to pick the things you do, or work with something that you really like.
Yeah.
Whereas this was interesting, but it wasn't kind of a passion. It was more of it's work to live in your spare time, which I guess is okay. But I think way too many people live like that. And you actually, I mean, you spend 40 plus hours per week working, so it's good if it's something you actually like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the choice back then, there I was working. It was in '98, and I was working with selling internet education on CD-ROMs and videotapes.
Of course, those days.
Yeah, so like a call centers, you would call people and you would try to sell it to them. Mostly companies, but people at home as well. And there they had this CD-ROM that I brought home one day, and I only had a computer for 1 or 2 years prior to that, so I didn't really know anything. It's like, learn HTML. Okay, well, it's the web. I've navigated the web, this seems cool. And so you go home and you load the CD-ROM, you look at the instructions, it's like, okay. And you type the code together and you save and you load it in the web browser and actually show something.
Magic.
Yeah, and it's that amazing moment of like, I created this, I did this.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the passion I think I keep on hunting. You want to have this epiphany, or like,
Interesting, so
this
always
is
back to
amazing.
that spark. I
Yes.
did this, this feels amazing.
Yeah, and you sort of need to stay true to yourself to do that,
Yeah.
because it's so easy to get lost in everyday
course.
stress
Yeah,
and
of
life
course.
and all the other obligations. So.
Okay, so looking for that moment that keeps you
Yep.
going. If you open your mind now and look at open source, which a lot of the JS community are involved in, what is the biggest threat you feel at the moment to open source?
I think right now, I don't know necessarily open source, but I think seeing the progress within the mobile sector, with having two major players, where parts of it are open source, parts of it is sort of the opposite of open source. And there's a lot of things going on there, which sort of, there seems to be a movement for new people getting into development that, you know, before, of course, you would build for the web, and then you would complain about all the different web browsers and make things work.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, maybe I shouldn't do something for the web. Maybe I should just do iOS or just do Android, something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big risk, because at least personally, you learn so many things from doing things open source. You get input from other people, and you actually share and work on stuff together.
Yeah.
And I think, sort of tying back to the previous question, that one choice was sort of to get into the education when I had the sales job and actually learn programming. But the other part, I think, was in 2005, started to blog. So when you blog, it's the same thing on stage. People think you know what you're talking about, which you don't. You try things and you see how people react, and you go from there. So for me, the blogging was kind of an open source of my thoughts and code, and then it turned into actual open source code eventually.
Building up a little confidence to put things out there.
And I think the biggest threat is probably the mobile thing, but also kind of the fear of, if we have this open source, we have no competitive edge, etc. But there's so many things showing that's completely wrong. That people
Yeah.
are making massive successes on that.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I was going to ask a question around responsibility to develop on, if we take Google is evil kind of approach, the responsibility to develop for and on different browsers and platforms by the community. But it sounds like it's kind of already answered in that phrase that, the danger is this kind of two platforms there on mobile. That it's a very scary place if we only end up with these.
Yeah. So I think
channels.
short term, the danger is probably if you were to build for just one web browser. You saw that with the Internet Explorer 15 years ago, and you sort of see that with Chrome and to some extent now.
Yeah.
So that's a danger, but I think that's more. It's not as big as the danger of people not building things with web technologies or using open source at all.
So there's a lesser danger.
Yeah. So it kind of diminished that threat in comparison, at least.
And with things changing as they do so quickly, which is fantastic kind of environment to work in, are there things that you learnt, say 5 years ago, that felt really important then, that you think, say in 2 years' time, they're just going to be redundant or much less important?
Right, yeah. I think sort of come up when I've gotten asked to write books, and you sort of know if you were to write a book on a programming topic, like once it's out and through the editing process, like it's over,
gone,
right?
Yeah. Okay.
The world has moved on. I think a normal thing is probably performance. It's really good to focus on performance, but the things we did 5 years ago to get good performance aren't needed that now. I mean, web browsers, all the web browsers across the board are 10 or more times faster than we had back then out of default. So I think the little tricks that you used to do, like
that felt great at that point.
right, and it was amazing, and it was good. You did learn things sort of like a bike, and you give a bike to a kid, and then you take it apart, like you build it together again, and that's crap. But you learn from it, it's like what is this?
Yeah, exactly.
But you should need to go through the process and be directly there, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And one last question to wrap up this little session. If you could change one thing about either JS as a language or the community around JS, what would that be?
Well, I think it wouldn't be the language. I mean, things are moving along there, and there's going to be endless discussions about what matters, and it's all about perspective. Like some things are crucial to some people, and where it doesn't help at all for others. So I think it's more about the mindset. I think it's more about back to open source code to share the code and to share the experience, and then to make sure that it works for everyone. I think, being a bit philosophical, but I think the internet is the most democratic medium we have.
Absolutely.
And it would be such a terrible thing to lose that based on some simpler path at that moment.
Yeah, I think that's a very current and hot kind of subject. An important one that needs to have a voice. We talked about. Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. So many great talks packed in.
Now I can relax.
Now you're done. You can dance and on the big stage. Good. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And goodbye to live streamers.
Yep.
We'll see you later.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.